So my current job title is President of International. That basically means for the company I work for, who provide background and identity screening services, I lead the commercial teams, I lead the customers, like everything from the UK through to Australia, a few hundred people, a whole set of products, and just looking for ways to run the business, grow the business, and all that sort of stuff.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
The stuff that makes it tick over and actually grow as a company. And so you said you're in charge of just a few hundred people.
Yeah, a few hundred people, yeah.
Is that a few hundred people that directly report into you, or is that kind of broken down?
Yeah, so I've got a leadership team who have all got leaders in each of the different countries that we operate in the international region. So there's a team that do sales, there's a team that does marketing, there's a team that does client success. We've got like some product teams and stuff like that as well.
Okay, so how many people would directly report to you?
I would only have 6 directly.
Okay.
Yeah,
nice. A sensible number.
A lovely number. And they're all wonderful people as well.
That's great. Because one of the things that we see often or hear about often, and certainly in, like team leaders, managers that might be on the first rung of sort of the management ladder, is you hear some horror stories where they're like, oh no, I've got 80 direct reports into me. Do you think that would be possible to manage that?
No, I think it's impossible with that, like the span of control, if you call it that, or like influence or whatever. Like I think depending on the type of job, you can get quite high. Like if it's a highly repetitive task, you can probably have quite big teams, but 80 I think is a lot.
Yeah, a lot of chance of misunderstanding, miscommunication, people then not sharing their thoughts and feelings, and hiding things away, flying under the radar because I can get away with it. Not that people intend to.
Yeah.
So we've got a selection of questions to ask you, and this is part of a series that I'm going to be producing with managers and leaders like yourself that are actually really doing the job, making a positive difference in people's lives. For managers and leaders out there that sometimes are just after a little bit of inspiration, maybe a couple of little nuggets of ideas and techniques that have worked for you over the years, or even just a little bit of affirmation that they're on the right lines.
Yeah,
as you've probably experienced, as you've worked your way up, that managing looks easy when you're not doing it. It looks like a bit of a golden ticket to sitting back, joining in a few meetings and not doing very much work and making everyone else do the work. And then when you get there, you realize it's really quite different and often quite a difficult position to be in at times, when you've got lots of competing ideas and people to support. And as they always say, never work with children and animals, but you could argue never work with people as well, because they bring their stuff. Yeah. And part of a manager's role is to try and support with that to the best of our ability. So hopefully people will really appreciate the insights that you've got. So we'll just jump straight into the first question. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask anybody that I work with. And I realize that one of the choices of words that I'll pick is maybe a little bit weird, but I think it's really important. So the question is, what's the part of the job that gives you energy?
Okay, so I am very competitive.
Nice.
And so that kind of plays out in business for me more than it does in other spheres of life, I guess. So I think what gives me energy is winning and really doing that as a team. So when you set a goal or an objective, or you lay out a strategy, whether that's short term or long term, like there are these little milestones along the way where you go, that's a win. And when you've done that with people and like together you've said, let's try and do this or let's do that, and here's how we can try and get there. Like those moments of winning, that's absolutely what gives me the energy. And when you do it with other people and you see growth in yourself and in them and as a team, that adds to it.
So I guess you're saying that the spotlight when you win isn't on you as the manager, leader.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Because otherwise we'd have lots of one-man bands out there, wouldn't we? But I think like that, and actually the satisfaction of winning gets greater the more people I think that are involved.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, we had a win just recently where one of our clients who had been they'd had some challenges with the services over the last kind of year or so, and so many people in my different teams had got involved in kind of listening, understanding, putting solutions in place, like driving those things through. And then just recently, the client said, "Oh, we'd like to give you like 3 times as much business in these other locations." And you kind of, that sense of win comes from all the hard work that's come from it. So when you can really look and point to all of that, like, we didn't just win a new bit of business. We saved a bit, we improved it, we demonstrated what good looks like to them, we like reinvested. Like, that's the win when it all comes together.
How does it feel then if we look at the other side of that coin when it's not winning? How do you feel about it?
And I think you need a broad sense of what a win looks like, don't you? Because otherwise, I'm not saying we don't lose. Everyone loses sometimes, right? There's lessons there, and you can win by learning.
Yes.
100%. And there's also like how you measure a win is really important, and the broader your perspective on that. So like a win can just be seeing someone do something they couldn't do before, and a win is seeing someone promoted into a role that a year ago they wouldn't have thought possible. But like there's so many different ways of seeing that. So even when you have a big loss in business, it will be peppered and surrounded by so many other wins that you can still find that energy.
Yeah. Do you think then it's important to be pragmatic about those losses? You know, there's great learning from it, but we also need to be optimistic about those small wins to keep that energy there with the team, because it can be disheartening at times when we have a big loss, or it's not an anticipated loss.
Yeah,
we thought we were a bit of a shoe-in for something.
Yeah, totally. I think someone that I work with and have worked with for a long time talks a lot about toxic positivity.
Yes.
So they absolutely hate it when a manager or a leader is just always looking on the bright side, right? So there's got to be realism around losses and like, okay, let's think about why we didn't win this one. Like, is our product just not where it needed to be? What can we do to fix that for the future? Like, realistic around it. But it is also the responsibility of a manager or a leader to be able to kind of lift people up from the loss. Because when you're on the front line, you feel that loss in a much more personal way. And so being able to help people see the next thing and move them on to something more quickly, that's important. But just not like toxic positivity that ignores reality. And
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's the intent is there. Let's be positive about it. But when we're completely ignorant of the reality and the facts that it wasn't successful, there were mistakes, there were balls that were dropped, people lose trust and we lack credibility when we can't see the woods for the trees and everything's all, happy clappy all the time, which is just not the reality of, number one, life in general, but number two, business as well.
True.
I think it's Amy Edmondson is I can't remember a title, professor of maybe Harvard University Business School, something along those lines. And she said, whenever we have a loss, things go well, the first question we should always ask is, what was the learning from it?
Yeah.
And in that tone as well, just neutral, I'm interested, there's no judgment. What was the learning? Let's be realistic, there is learning from it. And then Robert Iger, the CEO, I think he's left now, ex-CEO of Disney, said that pragmatic optimism. So let's do the learning, but always on the side of hope that we can, next time, we'll improve. If we learn, we'll move forward. Because you might have heard people say this statement, well, let's be realistic.
Yeah.
And they're erring on the side of cynicism.
Yeah.
Come on, let's look for all of the reasons it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And it's easy to fall into that if you've had a loss.
Yeah.
It's out of interest. If you ever do have someone in a team, hypothetically, that might be cynical, let's say, how do you, what would your way of dealing with it be?
Well, I think it sometimes depends which role they're in. Yeah. Sometimes that's really helpful, depending what role you're expecting them to play.
Yeah.
But if it's creating negativity or it's causing issues within the group, I think it's often just like questioning where that's coming from for them. Like, what it sounds like you're not fully invested in maybe what we're trying to do. Is like, do you think we're on the wrong path?
Yeah.
Do you think we should be doing something differently? Like, help me understand. And sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's just people are wired that way.
Yeah.
And they're just more default is to like, and sometimes it's quite a protective way of thinking. It's actually, if I don't get too excited about this, if it doesn't work, then I'm kind of protected. So I think just recognizing that it doesn't always just come from a bad place. Sometimes it's a good thing. It's helpful for the team to actually have that voice in it. Sometimes it's also just a personality thing. And the way I like, and I think the way you select your leaders and managers is important. So like, I talk a lot about expect great things, which is, I guess, that optimism, but then make them happen, right? So you have to be accountable for driving through the vision that you see. And I think if you have a team of people that are driving that and that's coming through as a guiding principle, then it's quite hard for people to then push up against that, because you're saying, well, like, yeah, we're expecting this really good thing, but we're also invested in making it happen.
Yeah.
So if you're not invested in it, you have to tell us why, so that we can keep moving forward.
So there's a value, but then you talk around the behaviours to achieve that value, which is often one of the things that, we see companies do this, where they put, we are, driven, innovative, creative, but then you ask team members, how does that affect your day-to-day choices that you make? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've seen those. They're on a mug.
Yeah.
They're on a wall somewhere. So it sounds like you make a big effort to make sure that the statements that you make impact the choices and the behaviours that people take forward.
Yeah, I think there should be an integrity in not just a person and how they lead, but like how that fits within the bigger picture of an organization as well.
Yeah. I love the fact, something you mentioned just a moment ago around, people might be struggling with something and they might be a little bit cynical around it, and they may well be protecting themselves. One of the things that I've often observed myself is, I don't know whether this is scientifically true, but it's a nice standpoint to take, and it sounds similar to what you feel, Steve, is that behind what they're doing is something positive for themselves.
Yeah.
We might as observers go, all right, this is difficult, and it's not ending up in the way that we want. But I can't criticize you for the reason that you're doing it, to keep yourself safe, to not overstretch yourself, to be saying, do you know what, in a roundabout way, I disagree.
Yeah.
You're just not using that language. And when we take that mindset, we can have much more empathy. And when we have much more empathy, we can work through it with people.
Yeah.
As soon as people feel judged, they close up even further.
Yeah.
And then, just because you mentioned toxic positivity, how often are we hearing the word toxic?
Yeah, so much.
Toxic leadership, toxic culture, toxic workplace, toxic manager. And I'm not dismissing that there may be difficult places to work with, very difficult cultures. But when we start using those types of labels, we then start seeing everything that person does as toxic.
Yeah.
So they stand up for themselves, toxic.
Yeah.
So they disagree or shut down and protect themselves, toxic. Rather than, actually, they may be looking out for themselves.
Yeah.
And we all look out for ourselves at some point.
Yeah, totally. And I did some NLP training, linguistic programming. And one of the principles that really just challenged me and stood out to me during that was, they made the statement, everyone will always do the best they can with the resources they have at the time.
Yes.
Is that statement true or false? And I was like, that's false.
Yeah.
Some people clearly do not do the best they can. But then the more you think about it, the more like, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I think no one gets up in the morning and goes, I am going to do the worst I can do today on purpose. Like, no, that's not how people exist, I don't think. Everyone will do the best they can do. And there are reasons why that good might look the way that it does. And a lot of our job as a manager or a leader is to be able to tap into that and help create safe spaces for people to be able to do the good that we'd love to see them, like, that's going to drive productivity or results or whatever. But yeah,
I 100% agree. Our job is to create that safe space. Yeah, to unify people, to provide the resources for them, because they're the ones that are actually building it and doing the job to make it happen.
Yeah,
our job is to make sure that they've got everything they need. Again, I don't know whether this is technically true, but something that I talk around as a principle. Really, our job certainly as a manager is there's just two things: make sure that people feel safe, and that they are able to make progress.
Yeah.
And if they're not able to make progress, the first place we should look is, do they feel safe?
Mm-hmm.
Do they not have the resources? It's an us issue to begin with. Yeah. And then if we work through that and yes, there's, they're absolutely fine, there's still a good reason that they're not making progress, whether it's motivation, mindset, or other things.
Yeah.
Well, that NLP, if anyone, I'm looking at cameras here. I've done quite a lot of that as well. It's such a great, and I like that it might not be true, but it makes you think.
Yeah.
We have a similar saying that I use on training to what you mentioned, Steve, which is behind every action is positive intent.
Yeah.
Do you agree or not? And straight away, no, there's definitely not. I can give you examples. And then when you unpick it with them, they're like, oh, all right, yeah, for themselves, yes, for themselves. We don't have to agree, but they're doing it for a good reason. Yeah. So if they're not motivated for work, there's a good reason for themselves. Maybe they're feeling burnt out. Maybe they would just prefer to do something else that gives them a bit of joy. Maybe they're bored of that particular task. If we are non-judgmental and more curious, we're more likely to get a positive conversation. Yeah. Amazing. So it sounds like you have really effective teams then. How I love that you're humble about that. You wouldn't say that, but me listening, it sounds like you've got a really effective team. How have you built up an effective team? How have you created that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, my teams definitely are effective, and they're fun. I think it's harder to take credit for it. So I think of myself now as a leader, and so I'm less involved in the day-to-day management of teams. And so for me, effective teams, my job is to make it as easy as possible for managers to plug their people in. And so for me, I think being really clear about where, as a business group or team, we're going, why we're making the choices we're making, being really transparent about that, getting involvement from people so that people are invested in it and aligned with it. And because I think that's it. It lifts a task from being something I must do for my paycheck at the end of the month to being a part that I'm playing, a way that I'm contributing into something bigger.
Yeah.
And I think if people in all the different teams that kind of roll up in the different countries in my group, if they all feel connected to it, then I think that's what really leads to these kind of high-performing teams.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny you say that. I've just written an article around finding joy in work. And a Dr. Paul Zak, who does work around building trust, suggests that joy in work anyway, is trust plus sense of purpose. And so if people feel trusted and they've got a very clear sense of purpose, and tied in with if that purpose and that meaning is it's not always possible, but is bigger than just ourselves.
Yeah.
Like that. Someone on the outside, whether it's a client or, community in general, get some type of benefit.
Yeah.
That really helps. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're trying to create in your...
Yeah, it is. And it's what's been modeled to me as well. So we had a change of CEO a few years back, and his first focus, it wasn't he wasn't coming in to look and change everything. He came in to listen and to really understand what it is that we do and actually what is the value of what we do. So you might be running a background check, you might be checking someone's employment or running a credit search or something like that. What's the kind of roll all of that up? What's the real value or purpose of what we're doing?
Yeah.
Because there was a purpose gap for us, I think, as he joined. And he said, we're helping to create environments of trust and safety all over the world in all these different things. And that was a light switch moment, and you're like, that is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like in different workplaces and in other contexts where we provide services too. Like it lifts what you're doing to a purpose-driven level. And I think I've taken some learnings from that and think, okay, right, well, in our part of the world and like in terms of like our contribution as an international team, what does that look like to be adding to that kind of corporate global mission? And then the more that teams can connect into that, I think the more focused they are, the more driven they are, the more they feel part of it. It's a belonging.
Yeah. I mean, it's such I think, a crucial component of an effective team, an effective workforce, purpose. If we don't feel like we fit in, we don't belong, we don't have something that we're working towards collectively, then something you mentioned earlier, we just become lone wolves, one-man bands, don't we?
Yeah.
The fact that your CEO was able to come in and notice that. And it sounds like he was able to not give you, but remind the company of this is why.
Yeah.
It's not just a set of tasks that we do.
Yeah.
There is a bigger purpose to this.
Yeah.
Which, funnily enough, even within your line of work around, data protection and, keeping information safe, it really comes down to making people feel safe.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses are really down to how people feel about that product at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes we forget that when we're caught up in a million emails and meetings and stuff. So amazing. So how do you then, with it being a really, I'm sure, very busy, fast-paced, global as well, how do you keep people motivated? And some of the things that you mentioned, actually, I can see would tie in with that. But is there anything that you do particularly that you found useful?
I really focus on how we communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So we're a virtual first company, and so that's a massive enabler, I think, for a lot of things. So I think I mentioned earlier, right? So our sales team, as an example, is not just a UK sales team. There is the UK sales team working alongside the India sales team, working alongside the Asia sales team, the Australia one, and they're all peers of one another, and they connect regularly through the week. Like, being virtual first enables that. If everyone was in office, they wouldn't be anywhere near as connected to one another as they are. I've actually forgotten the question.
So what motivates? So virtual first is a big part of it.
Yeah,
feeling connected, even geographically, that really helps.
That started to help. Yeah, and I think then doing that. So we've done that functionally. So each team has that kind of connection. There's a stronger cultural awareness. And then I also just make sure that every month we pull everyone together. We do like a really fun kind of culture-driven connect. And those things keep people motivated because you're getting to know each other. You're spotlighting different people's contributions, and not just like the person running a project, for example. You're getting to hear from people that are actively involved in contributing towards that. Yeah. And you're seeing, oh, that person used to do that job. Now they're doing this, and that's having an impact here. And when you make a decision to change something or move towards a different way of doing something, being able to show people the progress in those kind of, with everyone together. So it's really transparent.
Yeah.
And those things motivate people because you're like, oh, that thing we said we'd do, I was a bit skeptical of it. I've now seen it work, impacting me. It's impacting the client. I've seen that person like really flourish in helping to deliver that.
Yeah.
I wonder what I could do next.
So making sure that people have a really transparent is word that you mentioned, but seeing the impact of not only their work, but what other people are doing and they can follow suit as well.
Yeah. Because then when Steve, who constantly is looking for the next way to kind of grow or change things, when he comes and says, we're going to do this now, like if you haven't been able to show the benefit of the last thing, why should they trust you with the next thing, So I think it's so critical for team motivation.
Yes. Not keeping information hidden or thinking that, oh, people will get it.
Yeah.
We don't need to communicate that.
Yeah.
We have to over-communicate it. So, and apologies if anyone watches this and they know who said it, but someone once told me that we should rename CEO to CRO, to Chief Reminding Officer.
Yeah.
So we have to constantly, and not just remind them of what, the vision is, but also remind them of our successes and why we continue to do this. And it does make a big difference because we get bogged down in the day-to-day, and it's really important to have a very clear direction where we're going, but an acknowledgement of where we've just come from as well.
Yeah.
I love that. It's great. Let's jump to the opposite end then.
Mm.
So if you need to provide feedback to someone, and you, well, I was going to say usually feedback is around something that's misaligned, something's gone wrong somewhere, but as we know that we should always provide feedback when things are going well as well.
Yeah.
Potentially, obviously a lot more, but it's one thing that gets missed. Do you have any tips for maybe a new manager? They've never provided feedback before. What types of things have you found that make it more effective?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think sometimes, especially for a new manager, you can absolutely dread having to give people news that, it's like, are they not going to respond to this well? And you could spend days, even weeks. Like, I know that as a young manager, I used to push these things out. I'd put it off. So you notice it. You put it off and you put it off and you put it off. And it gets bigger and bigger in your own head until it becomes for you something enormous. When actually, for that person, it probably isn't as big as you're making it yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, a couple of things on that. I think it absolutely ties into how you motivate people as well, right? Because one of the biggest demotivators for me is when someone in the team that I'm working in is clearly not engaged and clearly not delivering, and you're relying on someone to be able to hit your deadline or achieve something, and they're not pulling it. And if that goes unacknowledged, it pulls everything down.
Yeah.
And so actually, as a manager, the right and best thing to do is to quickly go, oh, can we have a quick, like, just, I noticed this earlier.
Yeah.
Like, what happened there? Like, and as informal, as normal, as down to earth as possible, and as in the moment as possible. And in the same way that you'd go, wow, that was great, well done. Just be like, oh, I don't really get why you did that. Talk to me about that. Because if it goes unaddressed, it becomes bigger for the manager. It becomes harder to have the conversation. If it goes unaddressed, it has impact amongst the team. And the bigger it becomes, the worse it is for that person as well. Live in the moment, they'll be able to tell you why they did exactly what they did, because they just did it. If they have to think back 3 weeks to that thing you noticed then, and you've had to present it in a certain way that you feel like is safe for them, that actually, I've been on the other side of that before. You go, I actually genuinely can't remember what you're talking about. But it's become this huge thing, and now I feel wildly insecure.
Yeah.
So just as quick as possible and as normal as possible, in the same way you would have any positive conversation.
So speed, tone, and the intention.
Yeah.
Just it's not an issue.
Yeah.
It's so minimal. It's a little problem, and we're going to solve it right now.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with you personally.
Yeah.
It's the 3 Ps. It's not personal. It's not permanent.
Yeah.
It's not pervasive to the rest of the job. It's a tiny little moment that we just kind of check in then.
Yeah. And if you can do that, and you can do that in, like, consistently,
Yes.
that becomes part of who you are as a manager, and people respect it, you know, and they expect it as well.
It's normalized.
Totally normalized.
It's no longer it's something we spoke about on Monday. It's no longer a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
It's a conversation.
Yeah.
There's nothing difficult about it, because then it's just normalized behavior here.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the worst things that we can do is wait.
Yeah.
Like you say, it builds up and it builds up, and people forget it, but they also go, why have you waited this long? I had no idea it was an issue. And then how I've heard this a number of times, people then load up, and it's not just this, and it's this as well. And while we're here, we need to talk about this. And then it feels so much more personal than it may need to be.
Yeah.
So great. If you were a new manager, speed, tone, but normalize it, and make sure that it's just not a big thing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. Love that. Nice and easy to apply as well. And just if you missed it, what was I going to say then? That people are often not as nervous as you think they are.
Yeah.
It's what stops us is our own feelings around it.
Yeah.
And the more that we practice that, the more that it speeds it up anyway.
Yeah.
It's great. Amazing. This is a question I get asked a lot in the work that I do. As a manager and leader, how do you balance competing needs? Could be personal, as in like work-life balance, or it could be, the company wants to achieve this, but a team member somewhere has stuff going on that makes it harder for them to be as focused in work.
Yeah.
So things like that.
Yeah, I think, where do I see it most? I think one of the ways that I have come across that in the last 18 months, 2 years, is like I picked up this extra part of the world, APAC, Asia, that's small, with Australia, yeah, all of that.
Just a couple of people there.
Yeah. And I noticed very quickly that actually in the teams in those locations all wanted something different from the product, or they wanted to work with a client in a different way. And so you've got these kind of, I guess, competing objectives a lot of the time. And part of my job is to say, okay, we're going to do these things and we're not going to do those. And when you have a team that suddenly has twice as much voice, and that voice is kind of split even more, that's actually quite hard. You get quite a fragmented kind of input, and you have to filter through that and work out what to do. And I've found that really hard. I think one of the ways to overcome that is to try actually just kind of don't do anything with it for a minute, step back and take people on a journey with you.
Okay.
Rather than like it become your decision to make.
Yes.
Help everybody understand everybody else's viewpoints and look for is there a commonality actually here? Because actually we're all seeing difference, but within that difference there is generally, I found there was generally some kind of foundational common points. And we did that with our strategy exercise we did last year, which included some product work, right? So there were different, my clients in this country need this, my clients in this sector need this, my clients over here need that. Build all of these things. You can't build them all, especially when our requirements go into a global pot and there's other things coming in as well. So we have to be really crisp about the things we're going to do. We managed to get by kind of pulling all the teams in and going country by country and floating levels up and then coming together and looking at what was there and then going up again. We actually got to 2 or 3 things. Everyone said, these things are great. Wow, these are actually going to help everything. So it wasn't necessarily the things that everyone started saying they needed. But it was a set of 2 or 3 high impact across the board for everybody that we could easily go, yes, green light to that, let's go. And that was great. That was amazing. That was helpful. Yeah.
I cannot convey how many good pieces of information were in that, and we're not going to, because you've got other things that you need to get on with. I appreciate your time. There are so many things that we could unpack there. Such a good answer. The first thing, that it's not your job to be right. It is our job collectively to work out what's right. And a huge part of that we see companies struggle with is that communication, the willingness to work through the difficult conversations, to disagree with each other, to fight our corner, but that not feel personal, that you understand that no wonder you have a different spin. You've got different priorities within the overall goal. How have you got to the point where as a team or multiple teams, you're able to challenge each other? And if your initial idea isn't taken forward, your teams are still committing. Because I know that's something that people struggle with.
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think the team is full of good people.
Nice.
First of all,
hire well to begin.
Yeah, start there. And then there's a foundation of relationship first as well, right? So I think what I hinted at earlier, these different people in teams that could be competing are actually, we'd set them up in a way where they have leadership across the whole area that brings them together. So even before they have a competing view, they're working as a unit.
Amazing.
Despite differences within teams or locations or whatever. So I think that's also been really helpful. And I think everyone kind of wants the same thing.
Okay.
And so having a strategy that's understood, that's long-term enough to kind of make a different decision today because it's going to serve us in 3 years' time, but then also immediate enough to be able to see the value like now. That's really important. And so building that strategy, having voices feed in, build the strategy, work out where you're going. Encourage and form relationships. And then when those competing priorities come up across the teams, they can talk about it because they trust one another.
Again, so many good points and so many questions we could go off, but I think there's a really important question in here because I want to know the answer, and I know that it's a question that comes up a lot. How have you developed relationships because of geography and cross-functional teams? It's so easy to fall into silos. How have you stopped that happening?
I think we've had no choice in as much as being virtual first, because you don't get any of the benefits of virtual first if you cannot get those connections. So we laid out a three-pillared strategy last year as part of our, so we have an annual strategy as part of our kind of 3 to 5 years. And last year, one of the key pillars of that was strong connections. And it was because we'd gone through this period of change in bringing APAC and EMEA together. And we recognized the only way to be successful in doing something like that is to have strong connections. And so that looked like making sure everyone was working in the same technology. It looked like some process-driven stuff. We're going to do things the same way rather than doing things different ways.
Yeah.
We're going to speak the same language in terms of like how we talk about getting stuff done for clients. And that's hard. Like that means you've got to let something go to find a new thing. But it really is just, you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
And so for me, intentional looked like, okay, we've got some really well-established leadership structures. We're going to dismantle them. And we're going to put in leadership structure that I think initially is going to make people really uncomfortable because, well, as a sales guy in Australia or as a client success partner in India, like, why should I listen to this person this far away from me? But we worked hard, exactly like we were saying earlier, to communicate quick wins, to give opportunities to hear from people what was working well.
Yeah.
And that creates a rolling stone then. And that over the course of that year, I think that was the foundational year that enabled us to kind of have those connections, really.
So you took, a brave and courageous step to dismantle and rebuild, but a key part of that sounds like was listening to what's working, what's not working as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes as leaders, we do have to take a bit of a step of faith that we think, do you know what, I think we need, let's not stick with what we've always done.
Yeah.
If we want to be different, we've got to do things differently. And sometimes that does begin with the structure, how things are going.
Yeah. And it creates new challenges and new opportunities. Though one of the opportunities it actually enabled us to find was a lot of our customers were shared across regions. So we had a customer A in the UK. We also had them in Australia and we had them in India. And we would manage them or work with them separately.
Right.
Different. And so it gave us the opportunity to go to a client, hey, we've made this change internally. This could benefit you if you are organizing the same way. And more often than not, we'd hear them go, actually, yes. We're actually combining the way that we're managing our things on our side. So to have one person on your side working with one person on ours, that would be great.
Yes.
So it drives efficiency, it creates new opportunities for growth. So it worked on a whole heap of levels, which was great.
Amazing. That's great answers again. Thank you. Last question then. Very simple one. One tip that you could give to a manager, a new manager, even a seasoned manager or leader that might improve someone's ability to lead?
Okay. We've talked a bit about listening.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be listening. But to expand on that, I think often as a manager, either a new manager or even just any time, you feel the burden of responsibility. You feel the burden of responsibility for decisions. You feel the burden of responsibility for results. And more often than not, that's what guides that pressure is what guides us in how we manage and lead. We've got to get this thing done. Who can I bring in? How can I get that? How am I measuring success? And we fail to listen. So like listening to what people think is a good way of getting that done. Delegating out certain parts of a task so that people are involved in it. So it relieves the pressure on the manager or leader as well. It becomes that team win. So listening internally is really important. Listening externally as well. And finding ways to hear what customers are saying or what the market is saying and bringing that back to the team and letting that become kind of a dialogue, facilitating that. It just gives you a much broader set of inputs to make decisions with or to lead with. And I think it's actually very freeing.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think it's the best way to do it for people in your team as well.
Fully agree.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Thank you. No, that was great. I'll tell you what, I'll just press pause.
Where?
Stop. I'll edit it down.
Yeah.
Although I don't think there were any mistakes or anything that we need to chop out.
No.
But I will